My name's Ike Kong, and I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Curator here at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And I'm just thrilled to pieces that so many of you have turned out for Bart's lecture. So I'm thrilled that you are all conservation nerds. I had no idea that there were so many of you out there, because as you might remember, our last lecture was with a conservator as well, Claire Berry, and that was such a pleasure to hear her talk about Spanish 17th century Baroque painting. But now we have another distinguished conservator, and he coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, also worked at the Kimball Art Museum and actually was hired by Claire many years ago now. And now, though, he is more than all grown up. He's the chief conservator at the Princeton University Art Museum. And he's certainly worked on some incredible objects over the course of his career. He's risen very, very rapidly because he's enormously gifted. And in fact, he's worked not only for the Kimball, but also for the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, also in Fort Worth. And you might remember that Bart also did a Zoom lecture for us during the pandemic. Do you remember the pandemic? It's hard to remember that because we all want to forget it, but during that period we were all on a digital platform, and Bart was able to Zoom in, and he gave a really incredible lecture on the famed Ghent altarpiece by the Van Eyck brothers, because he restored, or helped to restore, with a team of people, that famous object. So today we get to hear Bart in person, and I invited him to share with us the many insights he's gleaned during the course of his career while restoring some of the greatest works of art in the world. And his talk is provocatively entitled "The Artist's Intent and the Paradox of Art Restoration." So please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Close out of that thing and then.
All right. Thanks, Ike. Well, the next slide will have more colors in it, I promise. Well, thank you, Ike, again for having me here. And it's been a while since I've been here. Last time was with the Picasso Braque exhibition. It's a long time ago. Yes, provocative. This is going to be a very provocative talk. No, the goal is to, and don't be scared, to let you look a little bit inside the brain of a conservator, in my case, a painting conservator, which can be a very fun and scary place to be in my brain. But the plan is truly to try to give you a bit of sense in how conservators make these decisions and how it's all connected. And also I like to hear at the end what you all think about it. So I start with this slide, which is an image, or a drawing better, of Saint Eligius, who was a 6th century bishop, who was known, or the legend at least, that he was called in because this horse did not wanted one of his feet to be reshot. Is that what you call it? Yes. And he said, "Oh, I can do that." And in order to do it, he just cut off the horse's leg and then put the shoe on, and then miraculously, the leg grew back. So just to let you know, sometimes you have to break something before you restore it. So that's not what I do, but still, I thought it was a good start. So today, I know I only have 45 minutes. I tend to talk too much. We will talk about the artist's intent, the changes in the artwork, and then, more importantly, the restoration. So I will start with giving you a little bit of a framework, and then we'll see how we can use that framework, and then we will end with a couple of case studies that will go from easier, at least in my mind, easier to more complicated. But I know that I'm a conservator, and it might be different for people that are not so into the field, which can be very pleasant to hear different opinions, and that's what I hope to achieve today. I'm not too much in the picture. I also want to turn this into a TED talk, but let's stand here. So the artist's intent, so obviously when an artist makes something, they have an intention to make something. That is kind of a key thing in restoration, is that when we restore something, we like to go back to the intent of the artist. But how do we know what the artist's intention was? We can read a whole bunch of books. There's a lot of manuals out there. Some of them were written by the artists themselves. So that's just kind of a knowledge that art historians and conservators have. More interesting, I think, or in addition, not more interesting, is to actually look at the art itself. So here we see a nice, beautiful panel painting, 17th century Dutch panel painting, Jan van Gooyen. So we can look at how the paint was applied. But we in conservation have all kinds of tools, which Claire probably talked about too, to see more than just that you can see with the unaided eye when you walk around in the gallery. So with an infrared camera, for example, the same camera that's used on night goggles in the army, we can actually see through the paint layers and we can see the artist's drawing. So truly the artist's original intent, because it was the drawing that he or she made before they started painting. So I'll zoom in a little bit. So these little squiggle marks are truly just the artist sitting there with the panel and making these quick notes on where the composition will be painted. So these you cannot see with without the camera. So this is just important because it often is used to, when a painting is not signed, the signature can be on the painting, but this is almost more of a signature underneath the paint. It is something that's really hard to forge, and it's almost like your signature. Then there are changes that the artist made himself or herself, which we call pentimenti or pentimento in plural, which means, it's a beautiful word, I think. It means repentance. Luckily, artists are not robots, or not yet, and they make changes while they're actually making the art. So here's a very fascinating, this is a hit in every class on campus in Princeton, Nosadella painting, The Annunciation. And if you look this time with an X-ray, we can see that the artist first painted the arm of Angel Gabriel stretched out and pointing. And now, as we look at the painting now, the arm is just stretched forward and downwards and not forward. So again, this is the artist who completely finished the painting here and then changed the arm downward. He also had a hard time placing this little dove in the sky. He first painted it here. I hope you can see some vague contour lines. Then he painted it here, a little bit harder to see, but it is there, to then finally end up with the top one. So these changes were very likely not visible during the artist's life. It is because the pigments changed and therefore the refractive index changed, meaning we can now see through paint that used to be opaque. Then there are changes in the artwork that are caused by the materials used. So in order to make a painting or another artwork, you have to use materials. In painting's case, you need pigment and a binding medium. This beautiful painting, unfortunately not part of the Princeton collection, this little girl here had a still has, a blue dress which was painted with a color that all of you know, because it is the same color that's used to stain or paint or dye your jeans. It's the indigo pigment. So it's made from this plant, and the colorants can be extracted both in a hot extraction way or a cold extraction way. And it's just a way to make a pigment that was much cheaper, because blue pigment historically has always been extremely expensive. So in the 17th century, and even before that already, indigo pigment came. But what is the problem with indigo pigments? I hope you can see it here. This little strip here was always covered by the frame. So the whole dress used to be blue, dark blue, but now we only have this little part left to give us the impression of what it used to look like. This is all extremely important information for the conservator while we're doing this exercise of trying to understand the artist's original intent. Another cheaper version of blue paint in the 17th century was smalt pigment. So you can see it here. It is actually glass. I like to picture this. I know this is true, that someone just knocked over blue glass and said, oh, this is nice. I can maybe grind it up and throw it in paint, and I can paint with it. So what happens is, this is what happens. all the blue color just disappears and it turns into this rather gray, brownish, not very attractive paint. So when we take a sample of this paint, you can see it here. I think this is a very esoteric photo. The potential for being blue is truly still there in its core, but it lost all its blueness on the outsides. And so that's due to the leaching of these potassium ions, which I won't get too much into chemistry today, but this is truly what happens. And this is where I hope you can start seeing this problem, which I want to talk about today, is how far do we as a restorer go to paint or redo or paint back what the artist's original intention was, and how do we deal with changes like these that were just because the artist used materials that did not age very well. Yeah, this one I just found, I just thought it was too funny. So there are also changes made by later inventions, and that's mostly what all conservators deal with. It's what our colleagues did in the past. And that is unfortunate, but it's important to know that that is a big thing. So restoration, when do we restore? So as I said, I'll start with an easy one. First week on the job, somebody came with a box with this painting in it, this icon in it, likely early 19th century, donated by a professor. And I opened the box, I'm like, oh, whoa, what happened here? So what happened here was it was kept in not the best climates, changes of relative humidity and temperature, which means the panels start shrinking and expanding, but the paint has no place to go other than popping off the panel, and that's what you see here. So you could not breathe next to the painting because the paint would fly away. For me, it's kind of obvious that this needs to be consolidated. So I wish it was that easy. Several weeks later, I carefully glued back all the parts that were loose, and I felt like that is, I hope, something we can agree on, that that's something we have to do, but maybe not. This one I think we can hopefully agree on. This crazy person here thought it was necessary to punch a hole in a Monet painting. So this is actually the camera footage from the National Gallery in Dublin, just before the person knocked this hole in the painting. And my colleagues there did a fantastic job fixing it. Again, I'm sure the artist's original intent was not to have a hole punched through his painting, so I think kind of straightforward. So it gets trickier, right? This is our beautiful Richard Serra we have on campus. I promise you it won't be about politics today. But somebody thought it was necessary to write this, whether you agree or not, that's beyond the point. But as we are in Princeton, somebody thought that message was not the message we want to send out, and therefore somebody went in and scraped away this inscription, actually making it much worse. So luckily we were able to, I apologize for the light, but it was snowing. But trust me, it's all removed now. Then, as also we've seen in recent months and years, when sculptures or other things get vandalized or graffiti is applied, more and more we hear voices of what should we maybe keep some of that graffiti because it's, you know, it adds some, it shows something that happened in the history, which is very important. And I said, okay, that can be an interesting conversation that we can have, but which one of these are we keeping, right? So we can all say, in the moment now, yes, we can all agree to maybe keep this inscription on the Churchill sculpture because it is of this time and we want to make a strong message. But which one are we saving? I mean, we don't know what's going to come in the future. So it's something, yes, again, the artist's original intent was not to have graffiti put on this painting or the sculpture in this case. But then when we as a conservator come in, like, what is that artist's original intent? And if we decide not to follow it, where do we make the decision of what to keep? And that's not that different than what was happening in the 16th century. I'm originally from Belgium, and the Low Countries, where iconoclastic attacks, I mean, these pictures we've seen recently in the news too, right? Sculptures being torn down, artwork being damaged. So what do we do when that happens? So again, one way could be to keep it. So this is an example in the Cathedral in Utrecht, where they just decided, I mean, this 16th century, so many centuries, they have decided to not repair the missing heads as like to show what has happened there. The same here in Cambridge. This panel, I hope it's hard to see, but all the saints were scratched out. And there the restorer decided not to intervene and leave this damage visible. So, a piece of art gets made. My professor always said, every 50 years you can expect a treatment. Conservation treatment, conservation treatment, conservation. And then it happens with us in a museum. And then the question starts. Can you restore this painting? I said, sure. To what? To the last time it was treated, to the previous time that it was treated, or to the artist's original intent? And that is not always so clear, as you already saw a little bit. But to make the case clear, I picked a couple of case studies of paintings I worked on the past 5 years. So here, this color is a little bit off, but again, they go from easy to a little bit more complicated. This one, for some reasons, just sitting in our storage, had this really, really, really disturbing grayish layer on top, which was very easy to remove. This layer sits on top of the varnish. So this is something that really easily can be removed. We actually use saliva for that, which sounds gross, I know, but it works really well. So I think that's, for me, again, kind of a given we do this, because the artist's original intent was not to have this dark gray layer on top. This one was a fun thing. We just discovered this. Discovered, that sounds that we don't take care of our stuff, but as Ike knows too, every museum has so many objects in the collection that when you go into the storage facility, there is really so many things that haven't been properly studied. So when we had a new curator start, we found this painting, Cornelis de Waal, early 17th century picture, one of those Flemish painters that went to Italy. Looked like this, pretty dirty. I said, oh, I can clean that, that's easy. Boom. So I took the dirty varnish off, which then, it was nice because clearly these Flemish painters going to Italy, learning about the color, how to creating this specific Italian color scheme, but when it's hidden under a dark brown varnish, it's kind of hard to see it. So it gets a bit trickier, right? So in this case, I removed varnish that very likely was not the original varnish, because as I said, every 50 years or so, a painting gets cleaned. So I removed all these varnish layers. Then I decided to fill all the losses. So these are little holes. This was a little tear that was in it. So I and we all in conservation use in this case, water-soluble fill material, because everything that we do needs to be reversible. Remember when I said I mostly deal with undoing what my colleagues did? Unfortunately, this concept of reversibility has not been around that many centuries. But now, since the mid-20th century, reversibility is truly an important thing. So everything we do needs to be very easy to undo. So little fills and little in-painting, and I think this is still very acceptable, and this for me is an easy one. This was only a couple of months' work. And there was nothing really missing, if you remember, like obviously there's not going to be a face here, there's nothing awkwardly flying in the sky. It was truly missing in the missing parts and sticking within the lines, so literally coloring it within the lines. Remember, it's getting more complicated. This one, nice Jan Asselijn Dutch painting, 17th century on panel, recently given to the museum. Jan Asselijn was really known for his very atmospheric skies. As you can see, like 70% of the painting is sky. This was a big bequest. We had a lot of paintings given by this donor who passed away. And our director wanted to assess them all with me. And I said, can I make a little cleaning test? So I did one here, did one here. And I said, I think I can turn this painting into something quite nice. Do you trust me on this journey? He said yes. Boom. So it gets really fun because this varnish came off really easily. And underneath it, you can see the sky starts to appear. It's a different temperature, different climate. But then it starts. So remember, until this moment, we had surface grime that was on top of the varnish. We had just removing the varnish. Here we removed the varnish, and then we came up on this. What all this stuff is later overpaint. So this is a previous restore or a painter who also was a restorer, fixing damages. These scratches here were painted with a darker paint here and here. Here is what happens when you take that overpaint away. So here the overpaint is still there, and here I took it off, and I hope you can see these little fine clouds that you could not. I mean, you can kind of see it's here. So it is tempting, right, to take it all off, and that's the danger, right? As a conservator, we always have to say, okay, can we undo this? Is it the right thing to do it? Can it be done safely for the paint that's underneath it? And is it just deontologically, is it the right thing to do? Here again, I took all the overpaint off. I filled a couple of scratches, a couple of losses, and in-painted it. And I think the painting truly transformed. And I left a little bit of this horizontal wood grain visible. You could technically go a little bit further and in-paint that, but I felt it was not disturbing, and it's part of the fact that it's painted on an oak panel. Okay, so this this was more complicated. I don't have a watch though. I'm going way too fast, maybe. Okay. So here, a beautiful portrait by Moroni. I came into the museum and the curator said, "Oh, I want this to hang in the galleries." I said, "Sure, let me look at it first." And here is a nice way that the conservator left us some information. So it reads wax lined in June 1968. Well, I could see that it was wax lined, but it was nice to know when it was done. So wax line means that a conservator takes a new canvas and just sticks it to the back of the original canvas. And in this case, very likely beeswax was used, and you can kind of see how. So you just heat it, you put it on there, and you take an iron and you iron it on there. This technique was very common in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even now it's something we try not to do too often. Not only was this lined on a new canvas, the conservator also thought it was important to have it real flat. So between the original canvas and the lining canvas is a piece of plexiglass, which I had never seen before. Aluminum sheets I've seen several times, but plexiglass was a first for me. So another trick we have up on our sleeve is UV light. So we can shine on this painting, and everything that shows up dark, so all these nervous lines here, this, that, this whole thing here is not original. So this is a conservator that added things to the paint. So I'm going to even say it because I know it's recorded. Wouldn't it be fun to go like disco bowling in the museum and turn off all the lights and just have UV lights? Because I think most people really, when you go to the museum, you think the paintings look all perfect, right? Because conservators really do a job well. But in reality, almost all paintings have damage that conservators have fixed. And with this UV light, I think it's also where we can feel comfortable, in addition to taking a lot of pictures, writing reports, that we're not forgers, right? It's clearly identifiable what we added when you use, and this is just a black light that you can buy anywhere for a couple dollars. X-rays, we do that as well, same as when you go to the doctor, when you break your arm, you can see through the paint layer in this case, like you can see through your skin. It shows you not only where the nails are put in, but more importantly for our discussion, that there is a lot of paint scraped away here, some weird little shape thing here, and that's all important for us to know before we start a treatment. We also know from the Princetonian, something I read every day, but not the edition from 1929. We read that Princeton was very good at hockey and polo, but also, this is pretty rare in the research that I did before the treatment. We saw that the portrait came to us the way that I still have it in the studio, meaning that is exactly what it looked like when I started the treatment 2 years ago. Why do I say that? Because Moroni was known or kind of identified as the inventor of a new portrait type called sacred portraits. So he would take a very beautifully painted likeness of a donor and put this person in a very religious setting. So there is 4 left of those, although he was considered the inventor of that genre. And ours was thought to believe 4.5, the half one, because they thought maybe something was missing here. but what was missing, they did not know. So then there was a big Moroni show at the Frick Museum. They asked if I wanted to give a little 10-minute talk to this study day, and I presented to them what I just presented to you, the UV photo and the X-ray. And then the curators there said, well, there's only one way to find out. Let's take it all off. Those were the first years in Princeton where I had a lot to do, but now, as you might know, Princeton is getting new museums, so we're all focusing on that. But I said, no, I would love to find out what's happening. So then I removed all the varnish layers, and that's when the fun really started. So all this overpaint came off. You see here, I left a little bit here for the photo, and this is what came out, so half of a book. This thing that was scraped away in the X-ray, it was scraped away. It's still scraped away. And then also this weird little yellow thing appeared in the sky. And conservators, or I should speak for myself, I cannot remember names, I cannot remember dates, but I do remember pictures. I said, oh, that's interesting. If I look more carefully, there's a shoe in the middle of the sky. Kind of weird to have a shoe flying in the sky there, and something that you would not see in the X-ray, because who would be looking for a shoe in the sky? And I said, wait a minute, doesn't that shoe look like this picture I just saw at the Frick? So I'm talking about this picture. Another sacred portrait by Moroni, and look at the shoe, and the weird yellow bits in the book. So the puzzle, often in conservation, it's like making a puzzle, but you don't know how many pieces there are. And as you go, you kind of discover more pieces. So I said, okay, this is interesting now. So what if I take an image of this shoe and I make it transparent, and then I put it on top of our shoe? So that's what I tried to do here for you. There you go. So I'll do it again. So especially look at the shoe, because whatever happening is here, I cannot prove that it was there, but the shoe is like a perfect match. You see that? So yeah, I wish this angel had this, but I really cannot say it was. So then I couldn't help myself and quickly in Photoshop threw it together. Maybe our painting looked something like this. It's not uncommon for artists to use templates, so I can imagine this man walking into the painter's studio and say, I want to be painted, and I heard you're the sacred portrait guy. Do you want to paint me? And then the artist said, sure, and what else do you want? And then they just pick out of these templates, and then the artist would reuse it. But now, as I said, it was getting more complicated. So this is what the painting looked like after I finished cleaning, so taking all the overpaint off. So we can see here a non-original addition. You can see here a non-original addition, this weird yellow bit, a shoe, half a book. So what do you do? Do you feel comfortable enough to paint this angel head back here and finish the shoe, and what to do with these things that were added later that are also not part of the artist's original intent? So this picture I actually took on, what day are we today? Thursday. I took it on Monday. So it's been a big journey, and everybody gotten involved. The curator and I are actually writing an article about it, because there is no right or wrong. I think there is very wrong, but there is no real right either. Because one way could be to make a new frame and hide these additions. So that would solve that problem. Together with the director, we decided we want to tell the whole story. That's, since I just wrote a label for the new museum, 150 words to tell that story is kind of hard. So we're hoping there will be all kind of digital gizmos that could tell the story, or me just standing next to the painting every day. So we decided on in-painting the bottom part, but not perfectly well. This is not me finding excuses. It was truly decided that we kind of show, it's not finished, by the way. When is it finished? That's another question. So that it's still visible. This we're still struggling with because it's kind of annoying, this part. As I told the director, I don't want it to look like I don't know how to in-paint, right? It's fine to show that there is a later edition, but the book I felt very comfortable putting it back. It was just missing a little bit of pieces here. I'm still working on this. This is truly just me taking my cell phone, so forgive me for the bad quality. So here I decided to start putting it back together. So what I decided was to go to this brown layer, which is actually the colored ground. So there's the canvas, the colored ground, and then the paint. And I think it calms it down a little bit, and it's still clearly a big hole in the painting. But if you stand in front of the painting, I don't think it's the first thing you see anymore. And there is enough there to kind of, when you look closer, yeah, I don't know. So again, we can talk about it after but that's truly where we are now. As I said, there is no right or wrong. I mean, painting the whole head back, as fun as that would be to do, that would really push it a bit too far, I think. So that brings us by how do you do that, the painting it back. So again, the concept of reversibility here plays a big role. We're not going to use, as romantic as that sounds, we're not going to grind our own pigments there with the same pigments, the same binding medium as the artist did when they made it, exactly because of this concept that we like to undo it when possible. So even here, there are different options. One is option 1, which I did with the icon, is to not do anything. That's the fun option, the lazy option. No, I think in this case, we never really had the discussion. It just was this piece is not going to go on view anytime soon. Also, somehow we are a bit more forgiving with icons. I had a very interesting chat with our Slavic language, with a Slavic language class on campus, why that is. Like, why are we more forgiving for things that, in my case, I don't know that much about? Although it would be pretty easy to connect these white lines. I think it kind of looks nice the way it is. But nice is, who am I to say this is nice, right? Here our friend again, just to remind you that this one too, as pretty as it looks now, is not that pretty in UV light. So clearly the panel was broken in two at some points, and then somebody spent a whole lot of time in painting. This was not me in painting it, but again, like in the galleries would totally be fine, but it has a history of itself too. Then there are options of maybe showing what you added to make it clear for the visitor that this is not original. You can look at it and you shouldn't instantly say like, ooh, that looks weird. But then when you want to and you go a step closer, you could be like, oh, this doesn't look quite right. And that one of those options, which is strategio in painting, which, I mean, you truly have to be a master of this. I've seen a lot of bad strategio. I couldn't do this. So what it is, you use just blue, red, and yellow. And in the way you put those together or cross them, you can make a lot of colors. And that's what these Italian restorers did here. So from a distance, it would look somewhat whole, but then when you look closer, it doesn't. And there are different versions of that. Sometimes they would maybe make some sort of identification of where the eye was, but it's a very honest approach. Sometimes I personally feel that they're trying to make something neutral, but I feel like it does the opposite. It kind of draws attention to it. Again, this piece is really big, right? Also, yeah, it's in inches, and it's hanging up real high. So this is, you could also show it like this, for example, as with the icon I just showed. You can do this, or you can paint it all back, which will be the illusionistic in painting. This is a slide I borrowed from the Ghent Altarpiece talk I gave a couple years ago. So here, the whole theme of the Ghent Altarpiece thought, Jan van Eyck and his brother Hubert are known for this highly detailed painting technique. That if we started not in painting all these little losses, you just don't get this true, realistic approach. And I felt like the artist's original intention, it kind of needed it. But again, everything you can discuss, right? Here, luckily, it was not just a team deciding. We had an international commission of 20-something scholars, art historians, scientists, and conservators, and we all felt that this had to be pushed to the limit. And if you want to really check how we pushed it to the limit, you can go to the Closer to Van Eyck website, which is the scariest thing. You can zoom in 300-400%. And again, my in-painting is not made to be zoomed in 400% on our Oleo TV, right? But you can. And so we all just in-painted with extra magnification, but that was maybe a little bit much. But I think the result is quite nice. Remember our friend here with the discolored smalt. So you would say, oh, but you said you can in-paint reversibly. Maybe you should just paint the whole drapery back. That's where we kind of draw the line. We try not to paint on what is original. Even though the original is not close to the artist's original intention, we still feel really bad about doing that. So what do you do, or can you do? You can use computers. So here, in this case, we're very lucky because we have cobalt and arsenic ion residue, which you can analyze. So you know kind of where there was more bright blue and less darker blue. It's not the same as when they tried to repaint ancient sculptures, because sometimes they look rather garish. You know, there's no nuance or modeling. Here you actually have the modeling because it's still present. And again, this is not done on the real painting, just to be clear. So this is just on a label next to the picture. So it's just a way to tell the story. Why is this important? If you would see all four of them together, I mean, this truly stands out. It's extremely disturbing. With the blue, it kind of balances out again. I think it makes the paintings look more wholesome. And to the biggest extreme of that, and where we're going to now, is my colleagues at Harvard. So they had these Rothko murals that were hanging on campus for many years, and they got quite some sunlight. So certain parts of the painting are discolored and others are not. So what did they do? They first did a lot of research on what the paint was, how it was discolored. They looked at color photographs, but then they said, but wait a minute, didn't the color photographs change color? So then they did research on how color photographs change color, to then come to this. So Narayan, the director of the Strauss Center, is holding this plate just to show you that it's not just theater lighting. There's not just, here is a whole bunch of red light. It's an actual mask of where the additional red should be and where not. Then you have a whole bunch of projectors, and you just project, obviously with not the high light levels, the color that would make the paintings look as close as we think the artist's original intention was. So completely hands-off in reality. Obviously a lot of research went in it. So yeah, I wanted to conclude that because I wanted to have a lot of time for questions. So what we don't do, because that's often our case, when conservation comes in the news, it's always stuff like this. We don't do this because this, as we just learned, this is the artist's original intent. This is a conservator not understanding the original intent. This is the conservator with his second try for the same painting, and it is truly shocking. This one I think you've all seen before. As nice as this lady is, and as famous as she is now, try to buy a painting by her. I also changed the name. I changed it into her name now, because she truly did not pay attention to the artist's original intention and just repainted the whole thing. I mean, there's truly nothing left of it. I mean, what is this? It's like a, yeah. So yeah, just to, and I'm making fun of this, but it's very sad, right, when something like this happens, because there is also, in addition to not following the artist's original intention, it's also not reversible because she used oil paints on top of oil paints. And taking this off again would be really hard. But again, yeah, she's now such a celebrity, and this little church is now really popular. So at the end, maybe, you know, was this the right thing to do? I mean, as a conservator, I have to say no. But for the town where this is happening, probably a lot of fun. So that's kind of where I wanted to stop, so I have lots of time for questions. Thank you.
Can we have the lights on, please? Thank you. And yeah, Bart's kind enough to offer to answer some questions. So does anybody have? Yeah.
If I go to an art auction at a high-class auction place, Christie's or somewhere, has that artwork already been restored?
Oh.
Or would I expect to buy it as is and have it restored after?
Very good question. Everybody heard the question, right? Just wanted to check. Yeah. Yes, both things can happen. Very often it is restored already. And if it's really, truly expensive piece, you will get a report that comes with it.
And it's by Simon Parks. There's a conservator who's infamous among curators and conservators because for decades he's been writing the same report for every object, it seems anyway, that comes to auction. It's in relatively good condition, that's what it says.
Yes. The thesaurus they use is very, yeah. No, but that's why when it's truly an expensive piece, it's very common that either the curator, director, and conservator go to look at it with our own black lights. When you're lucky enough in your, museums like the Kimmel, Santa Barbara, Princeton, we know the dealers, we can sometimes get the painting for a week, and then I can just go crazy with all the toys that I have for my disposal to do all that work. And then, because there are plenty of things, right? It can be, is it fake or not? That's always my first question, only because I just am fascinated by all these forgers. But secondly is, yes, the condition, because if it is like I actually took the slides, so I kind of regret taking them out. I put slides in from the Da Vinci, the Salvator Mundi portrait that sold for 450 million or something. It was restored, and it's quite restored. It's very well restored, but it is a lot of damage. So how do you, it has an effect on the price normally, that's why I put it in there, but in that case, because the object is so rare, and whether it is or not, I'm not the person to answer that question. But because it is so rare, the damage almost didn't care. I mean, the purchaser didn't care about the condition. But at no point was it hidden. If the person would have done research, they could have found the pictures during treatment. And yes, I think every curator, even every dealer would have a black light in their purse or in their pocket now. Obviously, there are ways of faking that too, but yes. More
Anybody
questions?
else? Yeah? I'll throw it. No, I'm not going to throw it. Just, yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that when there's a heavy application in pasta, that it could, through x-rays, we've been able to determine there's a lot of wet paint underneath, and that it could possibly take up to 300 years to dry. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it can take a very long time. So especially oil paint, which dries. There is it's polymerization, right? Everything needs to align the molecules. So there is the instant polymerization, which goes fast, which is because there's a lot of oxygen. And that's the touch dry state. So after, I don't know, depending what you throw in your oil paint, you can put all kind of dryers in there. It will be dry by touch pretty quickly. I mean, not 300 years. It's the core part that's tricky. Depends what you used as oil, because just saying oil paint can be many different things, right? Is it linseed oil? Is it safflower oil? Is it lavender? I mean, it can be different. I mean, most it's linseed oil. And yes, I just had it happen a year ago, a painting painted in 1960. And it's like, I wasn't thinking about, 1960 really? And yeah, it was not dry. So luckily it was just this tiny part where, yeah, it touched this outer painting and was able to fix it. But yeah, it can take an extremely long time. And also what we don't know is what the artist threw in there. That's why in the beginning I said all these manuals exist, because even with the biggest and the most detailed analysis, it's very hard to find out if an artist threw in a little bit of, in the 15th century they would put lead in the paint, or they would boil leads and then in their oil, which what that did was it would start the polymerization process already, so you kind of got a head start while you start painting. It's kind of already drying. And there's all kind of other secatives that you can throw in there too. But yeah, 300 years seems like a long time, but as a conservator, you better anticipate that. Because now everything's open, right? We're not hiding anymore. We're not doing secret recipes. Again, the older piece, you can download the 180-page treatment report with all the recipes from the varnish removal, the overpaint removal. Please don't do this at home, because, no, but it's true. Like I said, I don't feel very comfortable putting this out there. And then I said, yeah, but look at all these videos on YouTube. Everything's online now. But if you do that recipe on a 19th century painting, you'll probably have to call me anyway because you just took the whole painting off, right? I mean, there's a reason why conservation, it's a serious study, and there, it's not a protected profession, so everybody can be a restorer. Yeah, I don't know who was first. Yeah.
Have you discovered a lot of fakes?
What was the question? Oh, if I discovered a lot of fakes? No, I always think I do, but curators love me when they come up very proudly with their new acquisition. Said, "Are you sure it's right?" No, I just think it's healthy to ask those questions because there are a lot of very good fakes out there. And how often will a painting be completely analyzed? How often does it happen? Even, Princeton, Getty, the Met, I mean, sometimes you just purchase it and together with curatorial who does a whole art historical iconographical study, when they're really bad, you could kind of tell. But when you have to go deeper, it can be tricky sometimes.
To follow up with the heavy oil painting, I have heard that Jackson Pollock has some works that are so heavy that pieces are actually falling off. And I wondered, I know that there are some artists that use very heavy application like Anselm Kiefer, and maybe it's intended to fall off over time. Have you come into that situation? Do you let it fall off and take a photo of, what it used to look like? Do you try to reapply?
That's a very good question that comes up a lot. And Anselm Kiefer, I had a bit Anselm. When I was at Harvard, they have a really big Anselm Kiefer book, and it comes out once a year, I think. They will turn the pages. And at the end, you have this bits, right? I mean, I don't know where it came from. So they carefully put it in a plastic baggie, and it lives with the thing. And it's funny because you would think like when the artist is still alive, because that opens up a whole new level of can of worms, right? Because that's what we do very often when the artist is still alive. You would go to the artist and say, "What do you think?" Now, like I was usually, we can pick any artist that's still alive who's very old. But let's say Jasper Johns, you go ask him today, what do you want to happen with your painting? His answer might be very different now than it was when he was in his 20s, right? So it's tricky because we don't want those artists also not to be in charge of the restoration, because that has happened in the past where paintings were then sent to the assistant off and they would just repaint it and say, yeah, that's the paint he used or she used. It's like, yeah, but we kind of, then it gets tricky because like, yes, he or she's the artist, but no longer the owner, but still their concept and their artistic original intention. And it's, contemporary art, I didn't put too many examples in. I'm more of a 15th century person. But it is interesting, and it's very exciting too, because even if an artist says, I want this piece of chocolate to rot away in 6 months, and then somebody comes in and puts, or a banana on a wall with duct tape, and then somebody buys it, that person that buys it is not going to be happy that that thing is not. And there are beautiful examples of conservators. Oh, I forgot the title. There's a great article in an older New Yorker article where, there's something with donuts. And obviously the donuts, so they froze dry the donuts in order to preserve. It gets very creative. And it's, I should put some more of those in because it's very hard to see what's right or wrong because you get different players too, like when the artist's still alive. I don't know. I like them kind of dead. No, I actually do like contemporary art too.
Any more questions? Can you yell? Yeah.
What kind of training does one need?
It's a master's degree. In this country, I think North America, there's 4 schools or 5. In this country, you need a chemistry background as well. In my case, in Belgium, it was a bit easier because I just went in from art high school. There was an entrance exam. on which I had zero out of 10 on chemistry because I did art high school. I don't know what chemistry is. And somehow I still made it. And so yeah, it's hard because what do you look for in people, right? There is so much physics, chemistry, and science, and then there is so much hand skills. And it's finding that right mix is very tricky, and I think that's really started to show in the 70s and 80s where the science part got so much heavier, and just there aren't too many people that can do all. And that's why this whole subgenre of conservation scientists started to develop. And that's truly what happens now. We often, in an ideal situation, we will have a curator, art historian, a restorer, and a conservation scientist. And that's what we did at the Ghent Altarpiece too. We wanted to make sure we had an equal amount of all three of those.
It's interesting too, just in terms of the history of your particular discipline, because it used to be so much more in terms of apprenticeship and direct experience with a experienced conservator to learn, and now there are many more professional requirements typically expected in professional institutional settings. But that's not to say that there aren't still conservators who are practicing who don't have those specific degrees. So it's changed a lot really in the last, what you would say, maybe 20 years or so?
Yeah, maybe a bit longer already. But even before that, as I kind of hinted at, Rubens restored paintings, right? I mean, Heath restored Reynolds restored painting. I mean, all these painters were also kind of restorers of their own painting and sometimes of other people's paintings. And I also took that example out because I was worried about time, is the Ghent Altarpiece was restored less than a century after it was painted by two very famous painters. And it's like, we scraped it all off, right? I mean, it was 2 years of work. But again, together with the International Commission, we deemed that it was justified to remove it, specifically because they were trying to fix it. It's not like they painted a loincloth to cover up something, or there were no iconographic changes. It was truly a well-intended restoration campaign. But it gets very quickly, when there's names attached, it gets even more tricky. Restorers are starting to get their own exhibitions, right? Like, it's tricky because because I think it's the most beautiful job in the world. But you're not the artist, right? Yet you spend more time with the picture than the artist did painting it. But it's sometimes, you have to just say, okay, step away. I'm just here to, we're not trying to make it better than it ever was. And that sounds funny, but that's a thin line sometimes where you walk away from it and say, no, this is good enough. This does the job. And this quote, as controversial as it is, first place because there's plenty of female restorers, is that, yeah, it's true. Like, you don't often hear about a good restoration. You hear it when it's a bad one or when something got completely messed up. And so, yeah, I'm glad to be invited to speak here, to see, talk about good things as well. And yeah, it's an interesting study, very different. Every country has their own way. As I said, there's no protected profession, which makes things complicated. But when you want to protect it, what are you going to protect? Because apprenticeship is as valuable as a degree in a way. Who gets to decide what's necessary, what's needed? It's complicated, but it came a long way, and I think especially the concept of reversibility changed a lot. Like, even if somebody does something which is not quite right, it's very easy to undo it if they follow that principle. Yeah.
I think maybe we should conclude, but thank you so much for your attention, and I'll see you next month. Have a good evening.
Thank you.